Welcome to the Town Builders Podcast. I'm your host, Levi Wentz. Town Builders is produced by the NTBA, the National Town Builders Association, implementers of the new urbanism. Find out more at ntba.net. This podcast is sponsored by James Hardie, what the best are made of. James Hardie is America's #1 brand in siding. Their product is elegant and durable and is sure to elevate any building or development. So if you want to find out more, go to jameshardie.com or find them at your local building supplier. Hello, friends. Today we're joined by Mike Watkins, who is the founder and principal of Michael Watkins Architect, an award-winning urban design and architecture firm dedicated to designing a lasting and beautiful public realm that fosters community. For nearly 40 years, Mike has worked at the forefront of the new urbanism movement. Starting at a design charrette on a farm in Maryland, he eventually became the town architect for the project named Kentlands, a pioneering master plan community in Gaithersburg, Maryland, and where he is still based today as he continues to guide planning and design for neighborhoods and developments across the country. In this conversation, we get into the practicalities and philosophy of town architecture, what it is, how it works, and why it matters. Mike shares stories from the early days of Kentlands, insights on balancing design with development and financial realities, and his reflections on what still excites him about this work decades into his career. Whether you're a developer, designer, or aspiring town builder, this episode is packed with wisdom. So let's get into it, and thank you for listening to Town Builders. Michael Watkins, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Levi. I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, absolutely. When I was preparing for the season a while back, I sent Aaron Lubeck, the old host of the show, a list of people that I wanted to interview, and he sent back like a series of prompts for each person. And next to your name, he wrote, "Wisdom from the world's most experienced town architect."
That was kind.
Now, I don't know how you feel about the accusation itself. We can get there. But I do think it sets the precedent for our audience that you have had a very unique and distinguished career. And I can speak firsthand to the wisdom that I've been able to experience from you. So really excited to get into your experience and the wisdom and that sort of thing. But for starters, I think that we urbanists often breeze through a lot of these terms that we're familiar with, and we just kind of throw around without ever defining. So based on your experience and projects you've worked on like Kentlands and Norton Commons, what is a town architect? And for you, what all has that encompassed?
There are a number of people, I think, who have had the title of town architect most recently, starting in Seaside. And I think different people in that role have defined it differently. But consistently, I think they have helped architects understand and appreciate urban design and essentially bridge the gap between what planners do on the ground plane and what architects do making three-dimensional buildings.
So you see it as that instead of an architect that does every single building in the town, you're seeing it more as a connection role of bridging the gap between the architecture of single buildings and the architecture of the town itself, the urban planning aspects.
Exactly. It's the town architect. I don't know anyone that's had the title town architect that has imagined themselves, I'm thinking this through as I say it, but have imagined themselves doing every building in town. Perhaps there are maybe some of the bigger firms where it's not an individual, but a firm sort of playing that role. But the individuals that I'm thinking of imagine themselves more in that role of town architect. They may do some of the buildings in town, but it's working with other architects, and not only architects, but landscape architects and civil engineers, and sometimes even the marketing consultants, the whole team to pull the vision together to really shape the spaces between the buildings as much as impacting the buildings themselves.
Great. Well, that's why I asked these questions, because my ignorance was, I thought of town architect, or have probably used the term thinking it's architect of the town. The architect that the town leverages versus, like as you're saying, the town architect. He's the architect over the entire the feeling of the town rather than the individual buildings.
Yeah, and I think my perspective on this may have been shaped by the fact that when I started working in that role on Kentlands years ago, my first office was actually the old barn on the property. I worked there for, I don't know, maybe 8 months or so, and then was moved to a desk in the civil engineer's office, which turned out to be fantastic because they essentially do the working drawings for the town. They are doing the infrastructure, the grading, the stormwater management, utilities, all of that work that's necessary, just like an architect would do construction drawings for a building. And I learned so much from them, and it really informed my appreciation for what it takes technically to get a town built.
Okay, so let's go back to that. I'd love to hear your brief history on Kentlands and how you came to have your office set up there, because you've been there. Am I right in saying 37 years you've been at Kentlands now?
And 1 month and
I was
5 days or something
I was
like that.
off by
Yes.
that much.
Yes, you were close though.
So yeah, what was that experience like, and maybe along the journey, how your role developed as the town developed?
Well, the shorter version of the story is that I showed up in the middle of the Kentlands design charrette and started helping. And I'm still there, as you say, 37 years ago, I guess.
Ish.
Ish, yes. And it really started with refining the design because the charrette plans are only so detailed. And I learned a lot about that process from walking into one in the middle of it, thinking I was the only one who didn't know what I was doing. And over the years, different others who were participating in that charrette said no one did, because it was so new. The charrette process was relatively new, as well as designing new walkable neighborhoods. Andres and Liz had done Seaside by that point, of course, and Charleston Place, another small Florida community, but really not many others. So Kentlands was very early in the process. And it was thrown open to the public. So city elected officials were there, city staff, builders, area architects. The press was very interested in the process. They were there. Residents from the surrounding area were also involved. So it was a very dynamic, interactive process, not so unlike those that we run today, although technology's made a big difference, of course. So we're no longer developing our own slides in the bathroom sink hours before the final presentation.
Well, the charrette, just pausing on that very quickly. My introduction to new urbanism in general, outside of getting started on Woodbury, was I got invited to a charrette, so I got to experience one, and it was a really good time. But for me, coming into the space, I thought that's just been standard practice for architects for a really long time. But it was a kind of a new process that got started along with the new urbanism movement. Is that right?
Yes, and Bill Leonard's was really instrumental in shaping that process and giving it structure over the years, which was a lot of fun to watch too. Just as the new urbanism itself was developing, that process was also developing. And he now applies it not only to design projects, but other things too through the Charrette Institute.
And is it the idea of getting all the stakeholders involved at the beginning?
Yes, not only that though, it also has to do with Bill recommends 3 feedback cycles as being an important key in seeing that those stakeholders aren't simply watching the charrette take place, but are actively involved in the decisions that are being made and the consensus that's being generated and in the final results too. So we still stick to that in the charrettes we're doing.
Well, sorry for the tangent, but you got started on the charrette there in Kentlands and started refining the plan.
Yeah. So then working in the engineer's office really helped me understand how to take that freehand drawing, the sketch, and guide that through the process of construction documents, getting through all the approval hurdles at the municipality. So getting through the planning commission, through the city council, and then the construction documents as well. And it's very interesting. Every step of the process has its participants, many of whom had participated at one point in that charrette. And then it comes back around to, whomever, the fire department or the city arborist or whoever, for their continued contribution to the plan.
Okay, so you held the project together. So Kentlands, how large was that project?
Well, Kentlands is 352 acres and was
Okay.
originally 1,911 dwelling units. But I don't want to create the impression that I was holding the thing together. Joe Alfondre was the terrific founder of Kentlands, inspired to hire Andres and Liz and brought them in. But he had a terrific staff of his own. Steve Wilcox, Sue Whalen, Rob Talbert, and many others were the ones really Billy Winburn were the ones holding the thing together and guiding it through the process. I was helping on the design front, but to get this thing built, there's a lot involved.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, a lot of coordination. So Joe was the developer on the project.
Yes, in that early, the vision keeper of the place. He's the one that he had been building traditional houses already, but knew he wanted to build a traditional town or traditional neighborhood. He was actually describing what he wanted to do to a sociologist, David Wolf, who was writing HOA documents at the time. And David said, well, that sounds like what these folks are building down in the Florida Panhandle. Let me introduce you. So he reached out to Andres and Liz and introduced them to Joe Alfondre, and that's how they got involved.
Oh, super interesting. So 37 years later, how much of the 352 acres has been developed?
Good question. Almost all of it. There are a few scattered pieces that, for one reason or another, were not developed. And then there are many areas that are still underdeveloped. We have there was originally a large shopping mall that was to be part of the plan. That was about 20% of the acreage in the original master plan was dedicated to this shopping mall, which never materialized and instead was replaced with a shopping center. And when the shopping center was designed, its parking lots were designed to infill over time. And some of that infill has begun to occur, but there's still room for plenty more. And the city of Gaithersburg has plans already approved to allow that. It's just a matter of the market demand catching up to the available capacity here. So eventually we'll get rid of all the parking lots.
How do you, and I'm sure this is a combination of developer and designer, but how do you make a call like that to underdevelop, or maybe others would call it the incremental development approach versus we're struggling with this? There's a conversation this morning of like, are we going to put up the money to build exactly what we want to build the first time? Or is it maybe better to just build it halfway because that's what we can do now and come back later and finish it? So was that part of the, the call of, hey, we're going to put asphalt down here and 10 or 15 years later, whatever it is, we're going to come back and dig it up?
The answer to that question is a complicated one, in part because I don't think there's a single answer that fits every situation. You always have to look at the context. And by that, I mean the physical context where a place is located and, what's built across the street. If there's already a grocery store across the street, chances are you're not going to get one. There's also timing, where you are in history. So the shopping mall didn't happen because it was proposed at a time that we were building 24 malls a year. And because of how malls were financed, when that model changed, we went from building 24 malls a year in this country to building 6. And the one proposed in Kentlands wasn't one of them. So, for circumstances way beyond Kentlands or this location in Gaithersburg, Maryland, the mall didn't happen. And it was other things entirely. But what is interesting is that Joe sets out to build a new traditional town. And one of the things that enabled him to do that was he assigned 20% of his land to a more conventional use. So he said, okay, 80% I'm going to do something new and different. And he purchased, this is maybe important to know, he purchased 352 acres for $43 million. And then he turned around and sold an option to Mel Simon, a shopping mall developer, for 20% of his land. But Mel Simon was paying $17 million, 40% of his purchase price. So as a result of that, Joe was able to essentially pay down the price of the traditional part of the land where he wanted to build the traditional neighborhood. And early on, when the shopping mall failed, and which ultimately led Joe to give the project back to the lender, what people failed to realize is that it was the conventional portion of Joe's development that brought down the project, that resulted in Joe giving the land back to the developer. And that developer, Chevy Chase Bank, chose to keep Kentlands. At that time, they took back over 6,000 acres of land that was where development for various reasons had failed, largely because of the savings and loan issues at the time. They took back over 6,000 acres, but Kentlands was one of 3 projects they kept to continue to develop themselves. And they did that because they realized it was unique and could compete in a market that was struggling at that time.
As you said, every situation is different. And I like the nuance of being able to say conventional, shopping mall that some urbanists and designers would cringe at, understanding the realities on the ground
Yes.
that developers face in having massive financial risk and trying to figure out how to make this thing happen. I see a lot of developers, the developers in the town builder space are dreamers, people such as Joe that maybe were even, coming from a conventional suburban background, saying, I think that this has got to be able to be done a different way, but there's real barriers to entry on the town building traditional neighborhood development front from several different areas. I mean, increased costs at the beginning, just increased planning, issues getting entitlements and that sort of thing, issues getting financing at times. So it's good to identify these things. And I think that's where your wisdom as the most experienced town architect comes into play, where you can probably speak to this a little bit more, but the intersection of designers and developers and how in your mind, working through the years on the ground, how can designers and developers collaborate more effectively and overcome maybe some of those misalignments between design and the financial realities? What are those conversations like?
Every now and then we'll have a client that, for whatever reason, doesn't want to give us much in the way of information. And they want us to simply be creative. They don't want to tell us the top 3 favorite towns that they love, or, because they don't want to prejudice, our thinking. They just want us to be creative. And that presents its own challenge, because we don't know what they might be thinking. You have to kind of try to imagine, or what you result in doing is simply what you would want to do. How can you consider their ideas or parameters if they are reluctant to share them? So one of the things I really love to do is to spend as much time with my clients observing places, mostly good ones, preferably fantastic ones. But there are always lessons to learn if you're paying attention to what you're seeing as you walk around a place. And so the more time you can do that, the more you develop essentially a common vocabulary. So I love visiting precedents, old and new, with clients. And in fact, I had a client one time who said, we were doing this kind of walk around thing, and he said, I want to learn to see a place the way you see it. And I feel like when I walk around places, all I do is talk about, oh, look at this, look at that, isn't that interesting? And I wonder why they didn't try that, or what if they'd done this? And so I feel like I'm talking nonstop anyway, but I'm just excited when you look at places and really kind of study what there is to learn about a particular building or street or square.
Do you think other people find it hard to say what they want simply because they don't have the vocabulary? Because I assume everyone has a picture in their mind, and I think it could be hard as an architect where they say,
yes,
you develop beautiful stuff, so develop it. You're much more creative than me. Where you have a
Yes.
library that you can draw from, but you'd like to know maybe which chapter to go to, so you're not just completely off the board, because they have something that they're thinking about in their mind.
Usually they do, or the piece of land or the market in which they're working suggests, more or less density, or, a particular style, or, something to go on. But everywhere we go with clients, in fact, actually on this at this last NTBA, we did a tour of Forest Hills Gardens. That was really, I think, terrific. And we took the plans with us and took the NTBA crowd, and you were able to stand there and look at the plans and realize things that, like, how slight a deflection in plan makes a huge difference in reality. Like, you could stand and just compare the plan to the reality of that slight bend or slight curve in the street. So when we go back and draw a plan, or they look at a plan we've drawn for them previously and say, now it looks almost straight, doesn't it? But it really takes such a minimal bend to close a view down the end of the street. And then also to point out that that minimal deflection is not because we couldn't draw a straight road, it's because we didn't want one. We wanted a slight deflection. So when this gets handed to the engineer, we want to make sure they keep, that design intent. And, whenever possible, we do the same kind of thing with the engineer, so they appreciate what those design moves are. A lot of times we'll annotate our plans, so there's some recording other than the plan itself of the design intent. But we just had somebody here touring Kentlands, actually another NTBA member last week, a new one last week, no, 2 days ago, where we took them to several of the public spaces and said, now look how small this one is and how great it feels. Now look at how big it is on the plan. It's tiny. It looks like, you don't have enough open space. But when you see how wonderful a small space can be, then you start to kind of scale back, on the thinking there. And you have to think about, how the smaller spaces are going to be used or the larger spaces, and size them accordingly. I think neighborhoods, communities need public spaces of a variety of different sizes. And the key is kind of getting the mix right. But we work a lot from precedents to help. Oh, and another great example. David Toms and I were traveling together in Italy, and he got me on this one. We were in the fantastic main square in Bologna, and he's looking around and he said, Mike, I think this square is the same size as our square in the North Village. Like, oh, David, surely it's bigger. We were back and forth a little bit. And we got home and I compared them, so I could be sure to get the scale right and everything. And he was spot on. So we wound up putting a poster together from that trip of all the plazas and squares that we had visited compared to that main square in Norton Commons, just to help ourselves better understand scale. But he nailed it that time. So it's good to learn right alongside your clients.
Absolutely. Well, and I think that that's one of those things that, of course, can only be learned with experience, and you working in plan mode for so long, and then actually being able to be on ground to see it done. I'm sure that's been really rewarding for you, being able to be there on the ground and see all of this built out.
Tremendously. Yeah, tremendously. And at Norton Commons, we hadn't built that North Village square yet. It was still just on paper. We were in the early stages of refining that design. And, to be fair, David had been building at Norton Commons probably 15 years at that point already. So he's a pretty good judge of things like street widths and the size of public spaces and that sort of thing. So also a very experienced town founder, developer.
What else have you found in your experience to be key areas where people, whether it's clients or maybe even other architects, designers, urbanists, what do you find that people miss often in the design of these public spaces? Is there something that you always notice right away, or is a common mistake that you found?
Well, Douglas Dewani taught me early on the importance of not only getting the plan right, but how the plan lays on the land. So he taught me, for example, that it would often be the case that streets changed direction at high and low spots. So I actually worked with Douglas on the Kentlands charrette across the table from him, which was a great experience. And he's kind of explaining a little bit out loud what he's doing because, as I said, I had no idea what I was doing. And so he was identifying high spots are often highly regarded and given over to civic buildings in early new urbanist communities. But Douglas also factored in the low spots, the connections between them, and would change the street direction, trajectory at that point. And so that was very informative. And I wish more of our plans respected that thinking. You have to kind of stay ahead of the engineers sometimes because they're understandably trying to balance cut and fill and things like that and have other issues, the slope of the utilities under the streets. But as long as everybody understands that, you can often accomplish the important trajectory of and change in direction.
What is the idea behind that notion? Is it, and when you say switch direction, are you saying a bend in the road or an intersection or both?
Either or both. And Douglas would tell the story of how when people are moving from one settlement, one city to another, they would often pick out the high spot, go to the next high spot, check the lay of the land and say, oh, we were a little off. We need to change direction to get there and go this direction. And so down they would go. They get to the valley, look up, find the high spot, kind of do the same thing. So they were good markers in the landscape and good points at which people would naturally stop and reevaluate and make an adjustment like that. And we did that on a street here in Kentlands. And it's so clear. I wish we could do a 3D podcast, a movie sometime or something, but it's so clear here because we actually pulled that off right outside the office here. And it is such a great example of that.
To dive into these things because there's theories behind it and then you're on the ground and you say, hey, yeah, this feels right. And I think that there's a notion of that we can notice, even if you're not a musician, you notice when a note is played wrong. And I think we notice that also in our visually in how we move through spaces.
Yeah, so true.
Even if someone doesn't have the vocabulary, they can tell when it's good design. There's something intuitive about it that's like, I don't know what it is. That's just right. And the more I think that we can put language to that and identify it for people, the more helpful it becomes, of figuring out what are those things that are keys for humans that say, this place just feels, there's something about it that just feels right.
Yeah. So if you want to put language to that idea, that principle, I'll send you to the Great Streets book by Victor Dover and John Massengale and suggest that you go straight to Douglas's piece on Orvieto and read him guiding you through the main street there in Orvieto. It's a beautiful description. I guarantee you, if you read that, your next trip to Italy will include a stop in Orvieto to experience that. It's just really well written and very observant on his part. It's terrific. He took the time to do that. It's truly a great street and well described.
I'll be sure to check that out. Town Builders is brought to you by Brett Jones, PA. Brett is a practicing land use lawyer in Florida, and as a patron and advocate for new urbanism, he leverages his background in corporate law and personal development experience to help landowners and developers get entitlements and cut through red tape to build human-centric, walkable neighborhoods. Visit brettjonespa.com to find out more. So, Mike, I'm curious, what has kept the curiosity alive for so long? As you continue to just design and develop, what keeps you searching for that next thing, and what maybe even deeper than that, your why behind designing?
Okay, so first, a couple of examples to answer the first part of your question there. Because I was working on the farm in Kentlands that was being turned into the community of Kentlands, literally on the farm, and seeing this thing come out of the ground around me, I got to see the actual community take shape around me as people began to move in. And one thing that was particularly interesting was the subject of mail delivery. Now, there are a couple different anecdotes related to mail delivery that I could share, but to this point, the situation was that, so we start meeting with the post office about how to deliver mail. And the first thing we asked for was a single delivery point, which would be essentially the lobby of the corner store as a way to anchor the corner store. And we said, listen, you only have to stop one place so you could leave all the mail behind. And, everybody can come get it from their boxes. Absolutely not. We're the U.S. Postal Service, and we take the mail directly to each person's home every day, and there was no changing that. So we said, but how are you going to do that if we have on-street parking? You can't simply drive down the street in your Jeep and throw it in the mailbox. We're the U.S. Postal Service. This is what we do is we take the mail to everybody's house every day. We'll figure it out. We'll take care of it. So we kept pressing on the point about the on-street parking, and they said, oh, but you have alleys. So put the mailboxes in the alley and we'll deliver to the alley. Said, well, yes, but and he said, listen, just put the mailboxes in the alley. We'll take care of it. So we put the mailboxes in the alley in the first phase of the neighborhood. And the design was such that the houses that backed to that particular alley, it was a curving block, those houses faced 5 different streets. So they had no way to organize the mail by street address to deliver to the alley. So we learned a couple things from that experience. First, that they weren't going to do that again. So they stopped delivering the mail. Second, that once they've established a delivery pattern, they won't change it. So to this day, that block still gets their mail in a box in the alley with kind of this complicated organization thing. But when they shut down the mail delivery, Marcia Hopp lived in one of the houses and was one of the early residents. And they quit delivering her mail, and she called me. I'm the town architect. Nobody else knew what that position was either. So I got calls about all kinds of things. And that was one of them. Mail delivery was one of them. So she said, listen, we need to get our mail delivery back. And so the residents who were moving in at this point decided to help. They, after all, chose to live in a community. They were determined to live in community with their neighbors, and they saw this as an opportunity to help. So they form a committee, and we start meeting to decide what to do about the mail delivery issue. And the first meeting lasted about 2 hours, and all that we accomplished was to determine the date and time and place of the next meeting. Because what I realized I was watching is a community under construction. Like these neighbors, many of them were meeting each other for the first time, learning about, where they'd come from and what kind of family they had and why they chose to live there, forgetting completely this agenda of getting their mail restarted. And so we had several of these meetings before one resident, Dick Arkin, who was both a government employee and a lawyer, did something that never had occurred to me, which was to read the Blue Book, slang for the U.S. Postal Regulations Manual. Where he even got a copy, I have no idea, but got a copy of this thing, read it until the point that he found that if your average lot width was 50 feet or less in your community, the U.S. Postal Service would provide a mail carrier on foot. So we proudly took that paragraph out of the manual to the folks from the post office that we were meeting with and said, okay, we'll take one of these. And they had no choice but to give us one. Now, it may have been that some of our senators and congressmen were also involved in making that happen. But we did get a mail carrier on foot, which had unexpected and delightful impacts on the neighborhood. First of all, it got the mail restarted, mail delivery. But the kids were fascinated. The house was pulled right up to the sidewalk. The mail carrier's on foot delivering the mail. And the kids just thought it was the coolest thing that this person would come by every day and leave something, when they're playing on the porch or inside looking out the window. And so they would strike up a conversation. The mailman would wave. And the mailman had an interesting way of sharing information around the community too, like who just had their baby or which house has somebody moving in this week. So they were great kind of community pollinator. And then when somebody learned that the first mail carrier we had, his name was Mike, and he also happened to be a magician. One of the parents somehow figured this out. So they had Mike the mailman at their kid's birthday party doing magic tricks. And the kid was suddenly like a rock star in the neighborhood because, all the other kids knew him, but they'd never actually met him or had him at their birthday party, So we learned from that those folks, or the trash collector, Bobby was our first trash collector, were terrific people when it comes to building community and facilitating their participation in the development of the community. Now, another thing that happened related to mail delivery, Joe Barnes had brought the folks from Celebration through Kentlands on their kind of East Coast tour prior to designing and building that neighborhood. And somehow, I don't know, I got on the mail delivery rant even then and shared the story with him. And he called me, I don't know, 8 or 10 months later and said, listen, we're ready to go meet with the post office. Can you fax me that page from the postal manual? And I said, sure. So I sent it down to him and I get a call back a couple of days later and said, Mike, they took it out. So I think Kentland's got the last mail
Wow.
carrier on foot in the country.
Wow.
Yeah, what a disappointment. But now they will deliver to a single location. So we have come full circle where they say, listen, you need a central delivery spot in your neighborhood. So communities like Norton Commons that have come later have that.
Yeah, I'd love to hear maybe just briefly your thoughts on that a little bit more, because I know there's several communities that have their own little post office downtown where all the mail gets delivered. We got it broken into walkable blocks where there's a mailbox location for the surrounding 15 to 20 homes, so they can all walk to it, but there's not a central location that you have to go to every single day. So is that your preference now, just in the sense of it's this spot that everyone comes to each day and that cross-pollination happens for the community?
Well, I don't know about you, but I don't find mail these days to be so compelling that I feel like I need to get it every day. It's usually a handful of flyers, and once in a while, there's something in there that I need that wasn't sent by email or electronically or from Amazon or UPS, So I think the ideal today would be a central delivery spot for all of those delivery services, including the mail, if you want to use deliveries as a community driver, something that helps reinforce community. But they should be properly equipped. They should be lit and secure, of course, and they should include trash and recycling receptacles, and even ideally a place to sit and get something to drink. So it's not, you don't just go for the mail. You can kind of check off other daily needs at the same time, including engaging your neighbor.
Well, I think the Amazon delivery system, I mean, we're just moving to packages being much more common. I mean, it'd be common if we got one package a day, it seems. And right now we're in the early stages of our development, but I know that we need to solve something here, because my wife checks the mailbox if we have a package there. She checks the garage, which is in the rear alleyway. Sometimes they go into our backyard and deliver it at the back door. And then sometimes they'll take the long trek and deliver it to the front of the house, because our house fronts onto a park right now. So they'll go down the walkway. And so we checked like 4 different locations. I was waiting for my MacBook to show up yesterday, and I kept like ping ponging around my house, trying to wondering where it was going to show up.
Yes. Well, that's a package you want to make sure you get too. So, yeah.
Yeah. So no, there's solutions to find there. But back to that original question of keeping the curiosity alive. It's the little details like this that continue to need to be solved.
Sorry, that was a long answer to your question. So the curiosity comes from, as I think about being an architect or a planner and urban designer, what excites me is seeing the actual community take shape, the relationships between the people who are living and working in a place take shape. Because to me, that's, we're designed to live life in community with one another. And it's not just the bricks and mortar that are exciting to me. So once I realized what was happening in those mail delivery meetings, that it was actually community taking place, then you want to think, okay, what else could we meet about? What else could we do to kind of to fan the flames of this community taking shape? Or, across from my office, where my office is now, the first family to move into that townhouse had 2 kids in school when they moved here. Those kids rode the bus 45 minutes each way to school every day. So they spent an hour and a half on the bus. The small town I grew up in, I spent some time on a school bus, but nothing like that. And it just, it's not a fun way to spend your day. And they move here and the school is like 4 blocks away. in between their house and the school are all their friends' houses. It was a delightful experience getting to school every day. And they walked past the lakes and play at the water's edge and things like that. And they could stay after school easily if they wanted to because they weren't dependent on a bus to get them home. So seeing the impact that planning can have on people's lives is really what motivates me. That's my why.
Was that around initially when you got into your career and profession? Was that why there, or was it something that developed over time as you saw? Because if you went to school for architecture, your focus would be on buildings, beauty, design, in that regard, the hardware, as some people call it. But then there's the software of the community and the programming that goes into these spaces. And I see the town builder and the town architect thinking about things at a holistic view as holding those two things in balance, the built environment as well as the programming that pairs with it, that creates a vibrant community, a beautiful, vibrant community. Was that why clear to you back when you started, or was it something that developed over time?
I would say the passion, the determination to figure out the why, how I was going to use my skills as a designer to make the world a better place was there. While I was in, this gets into the longer version of how I wound up working for Andres and Liz for nearly 20 years. But I became familiar with their work even while I was in school. I was in school in the late 80s, graduated in 85. And back then, your three sources of what was going on in the architectural world at present were three different architectural magazines. And I would pick these things up and flip through. And inevitably, the building I landed on was one that had been designed by this husband and wife team down in Miami. And I just became more and more interested in their work. I think because I found it to be rational, to be well reasoned. I could understand the ideas behind their design work in ways that other firms I studied just wasn't clear to me. So I was drawn to their work first because of their architecture. And I did start a kind of letter writing campaign to see if they would hire me. I dropped in on their office. Eventually I met Andres when he lectured at the Smithsonian. And, that was my first. Oh, and I heard him give a lecture on Alvar Aalto, which was absolutely fantastic. So anyway, so I started getting to know them. But in the early days of their planning work, they hadn't even pursued it with the same speed that they do now. And the movement was very early. It's a very early stages. But when I started working for them and then started working on urban design, I realized, there's a huge gap here between what designers are doing in the conventional planning world and what's possible. And Andres was although I was working for him, he encouraged me a lot to study. He was giving me books to read, places to go see, and then when we were together on Charrette, both of them, Andres and Liz, were just, and Douglas too, others, Charles Barrett, there were others that were just fantastic to learn from. And it was just like the scales falling off my eyes, and I could just suddenly see the potential of shaping a built environment that was really impactful on quality of life. And I'm just forever in their debt for inspiring me in so many ways along those lines. Just had a huge impact on my career. I'm still excited about it. All these years later, it just still fills me with plenty of reason to get up in the morning and go do what I do. And to do what I can now to pass that on to the team I spend the day with every day in the office.
Are there new ideas or existing ideas that you feel like you haven't seen worked out fully? What excites you about the future of town building, or what excites you about, what could be?
When I look at the quality of the places that have been built in the past, there are so many that are so much better than what the new urbanists are doing. Now, at the same time, I think what the new urbanists are doing is so much better than what conventional planning looks like today. So we have certainly brought back a skill set that had fallen dormant for decades at least. But we have a long way to go to build truly excellent places. There are some out there. I just visited Las Catalinas for the first time about 6 months ago and found it to be absolutely fantastic. But I wish I could go to more of these places. And I understand how hard it is to build a walkable street or square these days. There are just so many forces aligned against you. But it's not reason to give up. We just have to work through this, and we continue to do that. And some places are further ahead than others, some communities, some municipalities. There are plenty of great old places to continue to learn from.
I lost you right at the beginning of that sentence, but you said that there's many places that you think are really doing it right outside of the new urbanist movement.
Well, many of the old ones.
Many of the old ones. Okay.
Yeah, like I go to a place like Forest Hills Gardens, which is only itself 100 years old, 110 years old. And you think, why can't we be this good today? It's just truly exceptional. And they were being very innovative in terms of construction materials and building types. There's just a lot to learn. And that place I used as an example because it was one of the early ones that was incorporating the automobile in the design. It's not hard to go to places around the world that predate the automobile and find beautiful streets and plazas and neighborhoods and so forth. But incorporating the automobile is tough. And we still need to do that today for the most part.
And even thinking towards the future, there's the people that are spending time thinking about what the futuristic city is and what it looks like. And there's going to be a day when cars are no longer a thing.
Yeah.
The urbanists say hip hip hooray, and we're going to get rid of the car. But that's where it does come back to walkability, where we know that's going to be a lasting thing. It was a thing of the past. People are still walking, and we're going to walk in the future. It's part of who we are and how we're created. So we know we can at least design for that, but maybe working in enough flexibility to try to think ahead of what is it going to be like when the cars aren't here, and how does our plan adapt and change at that point?
Yeah, so a couple things there. First of all, I long for the day when we all just park our cars and can meet all of our daily needs on foot and choose on occasion on a beautiful day to hop in the car and put the top down and enjoy the Sunday drive again.
Right.
So by all means, let's plan for that. In the meantime, there's a huge demand for housing. And what is that going to look like? So we may need to work on both fronts. Where, yes, absolutely, let's start thinking about car-free communities. Absolutely. In fact, we've got a client that's doing that now, and it's fantastic and inspiring, encouraging, challenging. It's a great deal of fun, and absolutely we should be doing that. In the meantime, we have a number of other clients who are saying, at present, we need to address the automobile. And depending on where we're working, the degree to which we prioritize the automobile is different. Some places have just unbelievable parking demands still, or they have the perception that there's a lot of parking needed still. And in some places there are, but in other places it's more reasonable, the number's dropping. But a lot of it's dependent on alternative forms of transportation and having your daily needs in close proximity. So if the grocery store is too far away that you can't reasonably walk there, you need some other way to get there. Or you need to figure out other things like how to have the food brought closer to you. So there are a lot of things, the demand is significant enough that we need to be working on all fronts. And I think not spending huge amounts of time debating amongst ourselves back or forth which way is the right way, the one right way to go. Like we need to be operating on every front,
right,
to make places more walkable.
Well, and it maybe goes back to our earlier conversation regarding incremental development design. We could keep designing and planning for the next 20 years, trying to figure out how to make it exactly right so it will never change. But we need to get something on the ground right now, and we need to be building in the meantime.
And designing things and building them in a way that's flexible over time, I think, is critical. Essential.
Yeah.
Like Kentlands originally having a shopping mall that became a shopping center that eventually would become a multifamily, higher density neighborhood with streets lined with commercial on the ground floor. We're not there yet. It's coming. Not there yet.
I want to take a moment to talk to you about one of our sponsors, Harvey Points. Harvey Points are architectural designers that have worked on new urbanist projects nationwide. With a blend of bold ideas and thoughtful design, they have experienced site planning everything from infill projects in pocket neighborhoods to master planned communities. During the site planning process, they develop floor plans that tailor fit to each lot, giving you a comprehensive plan to take forward. They also provide realistic 3D renderings that help the whole team visualize the project from early stages, as well as being a great tool to get city planners and council members on board to approve your new development. We all want to see more unique communities built, and Harvey Points would love to assist you in that pursuit. Visit their website, harveypoints.com, that's Harvey with a B, or follow them on Instagram at Harvey Points. We were talking about where the town building movement fits into present day.
Yes.
And I think there's a lot of different people fighting on different fronts to stop the bleeding of our built environment, making sure that there's a lot of issues to solve. And so there's people retrofitting suburbia. For myself, I want to solve the issue of we need to figure out a different model other than suburbia. We used to do it. Let's figure out how to do it in the present day, create a new model for it, and make that as the dominant model. But that's like stopping the bleeding. We can't build any more suburbia. It's just not sustainable. It's not good for our cities.
That's right.
Create a new model. And then over time, people are going to come through and retrofit everything. And eventually, the neighborhoods we're building are going to be retrofitted to fit whatever the present day model is. But the best we can do is with the information that we have. And we're trying to relearn right now. We're looking to the past for the best examples of okay, how do we do it? And hopefully, how do we solve an issue for the long term? And the best way we can do that is look at examples that have stood the test of time already.
Yeah, which is not to say to copy them. Of course, we want to take the best lessons, learn from the past, and figure out how, if we need to, how do we introduce the car and what impact does the internet have, or delivery methods, how they've evolved. What impact does that have on building communities? And certainly we do need to be operating at every scale and type. So we can be making our downtowns more walkable and more pleasant as a place to live. The same for existing neighborhoods. They can be infilled and more diverse and useful centers created. At the same time, we can create beautiful hamlets in the countryside that meet the preferences of a different population and provide a walkable community for them as well. So on every front, we need to be making our communities more walkable.
Well, Mike, maybe last question for you here. What would your advice be to young developers, young designers, people looking to learn this and make an impact in their career?
Well, going to work for Andres and Liz is a pretty good way to get started. They were constantly encouraging us to learn through the design process. And I think they instilled in me the importance of precedent. So we'd begin every charrette by studying the great places around where we were working. So clearly that's important. And then I think being open to, I hire a lot of younger people. And part of the reason for that is because they're not as burdened as I might be with having learned the way we do things. This is the way we do things. And they're more open to trying new and different ways. And so I love working with them for that reason, because we complement each other well. Although I still like to think that I'm open to new ways of doing things and just continuing to be flexible in the design process. Like sometimes we're desperate for a challenge. There was just a project where, I'm trying to think where that one was. Oh yeah, it was in a market where the pace of home building is just incredibly slow. And so there was a challenge of how do we get a first phase complete so we can explain to people what the whole is going to look like. So we talked a lot about how to craft a successful first phase and get that complete, even if the rest of a neighborhood might take years even to develop. So it was a new challenge. So I actually, 37 or so years of doing this, I welcome the new challenges. You know, you need them to just keep yourself engaged.
Right.
We hire a lot of interns in our office too. I think Brian, who is leaving at the end of the summer, I think he's our 35th or 6th intern I don't know, we've been at it for, I think we hired our first intern in 13. So just over 10 years.
Wow.
And we're a small firm. At the moment, there are 5 of us that are full-time designers in the firm, and we've had 36 interns in 10 years, something like that. I absolutely love having them around. And I feel like, so many people have invested in me in my early years that I'm delighted to continue to do that for others as well. And so are the people in the office. I was reminded of a really fun summer we had, I think 2 years ago, when I had two very persistent young students, both of them were sophomores, determined to intern with us for different reasons. One of them had grown up in Lakelands next door to Kentlands, and one was a student at Notre Dame from this area studying planning. He wanted to live at home that summer and was also determined to get an internship here. And we were so busy at the time that we just know to make it a meaningful internship for somebody that young takes a lot of time. You just have to invest time. And we were just too busy to be able to do that unless we could find two more experienced interns to hire, which we did. So we hired those two interns and we said, listen, we will pour into you, explaining to you how to do things that you don't know how to do yet. If you will each take on one of these other interns that don't know anything yet and teach them what you know. And it turned out everybody loved it. At the end of the summer, we had a big lunch to talk about what worked and what didn't. It all worked. They all, really enjoyed the experience because particularly the two older interns that got to teach as part of their internship, it really kind of locked in a lot of things for them as well. So it's just terrific having the younger people around.
That was some wisdom that I got from a mentor, was just talking about the stages of a man's life. And he said 20 to 30, just get as much experience as you possibly can. Say yes to everything.
Yeah.
And because you're trying to figure out who you are, what you're interested in, what you're good at. I remember getting into the work professional environment, not knowing anything. I thought business was like a formula you had to learn or something. Like I was still waiting for someone to explain it to me, realizing it really came down to people's intuition, what you're good at, realizing I had skills that other people didn't have. That was a really big breakthrough for me. And so you just need that experience to figure out what you're good at, what you're interested in. And at a certain point, you start to specialize, because that's how you make a career out of something and really boost your income, is by specializing. But you need to know what to specialize in. You need to find that passion first. And so just intern with Mike Watkins,
Well, I will say working with Andres and Liz for 20 years just fueled my passion. And not only them, but, they have great people, working for them too. And so there were many colleagues I had there that were just also terrific inspirations and influences on my career. And when I shifted, I left them after nearly 20 years and then did a 1-year master's degree with the Institute for Classical Architecture and Art that was offered in this program with Georgia Tech, which was a great year for me. I left before there was thought of a crash, like just before. So then that crash in 2007 occurred actually while I was in school. And so when I got out, starting my own office it was a 1-year program, and starting my own office was a bit of a challenging time to do that, but also a great learning experience for me. And I have to say, running my own firm as I continue to do now, I've come to understand Andres and Liz a lot better too, because it's different running a firm than working for someone. But I thoroughly enjoy it now too, and a lot of that I attribute to them as well. They taught me how to do that.
Oh, Michael Watkins Architect. It's located there in Kentland. Is it the same building that was the DPZ office that was there?
Not exactly. No, there's a barn on the property where I first started working for Andres and Liz, and then we renovated a little mill building next door to the barn, and that's where I ran the office. While it was being renovated, I worked in the engineer's office, then moved the office to the site next door, and then while I was working for them, built my home on the lot next door to that, and I built a live-work unit, and for many years had a realtor as my tenant on the ground floor, but then eventually started my own practice there. So now I have my office below where I live and this live work unit right next door to the DPZ office. And in fact, I'm having lunch with Marina Corey, who runs that office now, tomorrow. So looking forward to that. And
oh, wonderful.
Yeah, that will be fun.
How have you liked having that work below, live above? A lot of people would be afraid of that, being so close to your work. How have you found that integration to be in your life?
Well, most of the time it works great. And I'm tremendously grateful that not only do I live and work in the same building, but in a neighborhood that's itself walkable.
Right.
So I walked to coffee this morning. I walked to lunch this morning. I have 2 grocery stores, a movie theater, dozens of restaurants. My doctor, my dentist. I still see a barber on occasion. They're all within walking distance. Many friends in the neighborhood. So that combination has just been ideal. There are times when, because of this is something that as an architect I would change, that the design of my place is such that in order to walk into my house, I walk past the office. And so there is the reminder that there's something left undone in the office is kind of always there.
Right.
Sometimes I do better at that work-life balance than others, but all in all, I'm very content and happy.
Well, it's your passion, and it is your life in one sense, is your work. So
yeah.
Well, Mike, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down and share some wisdom with us. How can people follow along with what you're doing, or where can they find what you're working on?
Well, our website, which is currently in the middle of being overhauled, but will have the same address, is michaelwatkinsarchitect.com. A very poorly chosen name for the firm, and one many people have heard me say I'm anxious to change, but I always seem to have other things that are the priority, and I need to make that the priority one of these days, because I have always been blessed with a great team to work with, and our projects really are a team effort. It's just when I started, it was just me, and that seemed like an easy choice for the name of the firm. But one of these days we'll get it changed, hopefully before too long. So michaelwatkinsarchitect.com.
And some of the projects that you're working on right now.
Well, we have a very, I think, interesting variety of projects. One fellow in Ohio has us working on, they've purchased 2 malls, shopping malls, and they have us working on resuscitating one of them by adding residential to the mall. And we've just finished that in the last 6 months, and we're very excited about that one. The same fellow is building a series of cottage courts on a huge lake in Ohio that I'm told is really changing the character of that lake, because people have a destination now. They go out on their boat and they actually have some place to go. He's got a restaurant, a variety of other activities there, homes for sale, homes for rent, and it's driving all kinds of boat traffic to Salina, Ohio. So they're really fun, and those are for the same client. We have for another client, a 600-acre site out in Utah that is progressing through the approval process. We're very excited. It's in a jurisdiction that really wants to grow in a more walkable fashion. So we're very, very excited about that project, completely different scale. We continue to be the town architects at Norton Commons. We are doing design reviews there for a couple of houses today, and are very pleased with how that community is turning out. That's a master plan that was done by DPZ, but the particular developer, David Toms, wanted to have me serve as their town architect after my experience at Kentlands. So we continue to do that, and that's been a lot of fun. We serve as the urban design consultant for a municipality in Texas that wants to be more walkable. They've redone their comp plan and their zoning ordinance based on more walkable principles, and then we help them review the applications for development as they come in, critiquing those. Did a college campus in Wyoming that was really exciting community to work on. Just a wide variety of projects.
That's so great. I mean, no wonder your curiosity is still alive. I mean, you get great exposure to a lot of different stuff.
No, very, very curious. And the common thread through all of them is community, shaping a built environment that facilitates community.
Well, Mike, thank you so much for taking the time today, and thank you all for taking the time to listen.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Levi.
Absolutely.